We out of red in England. All aboard, yeah, you know it's Hype Train FC. Modern ambition, we got blue and gold in our kit. Plus, you know we the champs of the league, and we don't quit. Started from grassroots, yeah, the sport, we ain't taking it light. You know it's real, from fantasy to the field. You better believe the hype. Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Robert Austin and I'm the club owner and secretary of Hype Train Football Club, and welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to be going through a subject that's near and dear to my own heart, which is all to do with managing a football club. For around 3 years, I would say maybe 3-4 years, I've been going through the process of trying to find somebody to run the first team operations for the club, and over the period of time I've just kind of naturally stepped into that role. So what I'm going to be going through today is a day one guide for managers who, like myself, that may be new to grassroots football and need to understand how to run a football club, to understand the interpersonal dynamics of all the players and the groups and the responsibilities that you have. I've basically got a guide that I've crafted and spent a lot of time on that we're just going to go through step by step. That's going to help you understand your role and how to be a better grassroots manager. What we are going to do though before we start the podcast today is, if you can follow the link below to our Ko-fi store. Ko-fi is our fundraising website where we help produce social media graphics for football clubs to improve their own input online, and what we have on there is a free resource. It's you can either download it in a PDF format or a PowerPoint presentation format to follow along at home, so that you just have as a reference guide whilst you're watching this podcast. But apart from that, let's get straight into it. So hopefully you're following along at home right now. Either you can be viewing the screen that we have set up with the presentation, or alternatively you have it on hand, whether it be on a tablet, a smartphone or your computer. So basically what we're going to be going over today is we have an itinerary at the beginning. The first section is all about understanding grassroots football. We have a few sections covering your interpersonal skills, what grassroots football covers, and everything else that you kind of need to check off right at the beginning. Then I have a big thing where we go through where the coaches need to go, what do they do wrong, what do they do right, and where they need to go to kind of be a baseline for running a football club. We then cover the basics about what you should be looking to do as a first day manager, as well as what you need to understand from a training session and a match day as well. And then to end, we're going to go into a couple of the really nitty-gritty details, the hidden details that you need on a day-to-day basis. There are absolutely loads of things you need to consider if you want to do it the right way, where you have to just basically sit and assess how much time you're going to have to go through. Lastly, I'll just do an overview of the FA coaching badges. I've just recently finished my FA Level 1, or the Introduction to Football Coaching course, so I'll be able to go through a little bit about that and why, if you are a new manager, it's probably a good idea that you get going sooner rather than later. So we're going to start with understanding your football club. So basically, when you are running a team and as an interpersonal manager, you need to understand the types of people that you're going to be running with. So, you know, what type of football does your club play is the first part. So that covers basically the section on, you know, what do you want your football team to be? Are you a youth team? Are you an adult male or a female team? Do you run a church team, a corporate team, a pan or traditional disability team? So the type of person that you need to be in terms of coaching really does vary. If you're coaching a youth setup and a youth team, you need to be aware about particular safeguarding and wellness policies, whereas if you're running an adult male and female team, the way that you communicate and organize your time and your days and also your availability. Women technically play on Sunday afternoons, men play on Saturday afternoons and Sunday mornings, depending on if it's Saturday or Sunday league. So these are just the little bits of availability that you need to know. So before you get going, and let's say you're a new coach that's gone onto the Barks and Bucks website and you want to find out, God, I want to manage, I want to get into it, you really need to understand what you want to manage, because knowing from my point of view, you know, managing a group of adults over a long period of time can be challenging as well as rewarding. So you need to figure out what you want to have as your placeholder when you go into management. So the second part is, what is the structure of your club? So all football teams come in different shapes and sizes. They may have multiple teams, development pathways, such as development teams under 23s, under 17s, under 16s, 15s, and so on. They might be a lone adult club, which is technically what Hype Train is. We have one group of players that plays across 2 days of football. Are you more charity driven? There's a few charity related teams as well, or teams that place a heavy burden on raising funds and finances through fundraising websites such as Ko-fi or Patreon or other things like that. And also on top of that, you also have to be aware of the age of the players and the management structure as well. So at Hype Train, if you are going into managing what would be a lone club that you've started or are getting involved with from the ground up, it's likely going to be you're going to be playing at the park. You're going to have a lot of different responsibilities on your personal shoulders that you have to carry out every week. Whereas if you go to an established club that already has these foundations in place, they might have a clubhouse, they may have a small stadium, they may have a 3 or 4G artificial pitch. You will have a bigger structure in place, and those take time to deliver. So you may be working under somebody that's expecting you to have a baseline understanding of football, or if you're going from the ground up, such as I did, you're kind of needing to lean on your own experiences and the experiences and the communications of the players and people around you, where you can learn and grow and develop in a role. Lastly, what role will you play is, will you be running the club alongside a management or a coaching team, or will you have any type of support? So at Hype Train, I have Sam in the team, who is my chairman. He is largely a background figure. He doesn't do a lot for the football team, but he's there to help and advise if we need to. He goes to a lot of match days to get out of the house, to do some occasional photography, but largely the burden of work and responsibility is under my aspects. It's something that I do in my part-time and spare time because I'm driven and I'm motivated to grow the club. So it depends on who you're running it with. You may have a management team, a management committee. So these are all the types of questions that you need to consider before you're going to step foot and run your own football club. So we're going to move swiftly on to understanding yourself, and this is arguably the biggest point of the whole slideshow that we're going to go through today. So you have to really be motivated and ask yourselves these questions and have some fundamentals in place before you're going to go into management. So questions such as, why do you want to get into football? How long do you want to be involved in managing? Is this a one-season thing? Is this because you've got kids that are young and they're growing up, and as soon as they go away to university or college, or they grow up and they go into adult football, and you're necessarily not at the forefront of their coaching or their experience, are you still going to be interested? Also, are you interested in obtaining your coaching badges? I know when I started, the access to the coaching badges was quite limited because of COVID. I started around 2019 and everything just shut down for a while, so I was kind of limited in my scope for a couple of years, and because of that I was a bit lazy in really engaging myself with the product and understanding the basics from the FA's point of view as well. Also, do you know the realities of what it would take to run a football team week to week? There's a certain representation that I feel like normal people have in society, where they think that from day one you just know everything, that you'll be fine, everything that the club does and you do will be great. And the harsh reality is that it just isn't going to work like that. You're going to have a lot of stretches of time where you have to develop your club. You're going to have teething periods for long stretches of reality, and there's no second guessing that. You have to go through these steps in order to develop. Also, do you have other things in life that might take up your attention to time, such as family, having a long work schedule, going to events, depending on if you have a general life, a lot of other commitments? These all impact how much time and energy and commitment you personally can put into your own football club. And then on top of that, there's just a couple of other points. How much support are you going to need as well? So I'll just go into basically a little bit about how Hype Train runs. So largely, I'm at the tip of the pyramid. I'm the one that deals with all of the important content, all of the all of the details that a secretary has to go through, such as organising matches, such as organising players, trials, trainings, everything like that. So you really need to understand what you need as a training facility in terms of match days, in terms of everything. There's a lot that we'll go through. But at Hype Train, we have a management committee where I have people that I lean on for support in case I ever need it. It's a small group and they tend to offer advice. There's days where I feel lost, I feel like I don't understand something, I need to learn something. Or more specifically, what actually happens is that I have a group of people that have varying, differing ways that they look at the world, and they would appropriate situations. So let's say there's an incident at a match day where you have a couple of players arguing or fighting, or there's just a little bit of dissent, or you have a bad loss or a bad win. I'll look at it in one particular scope, because that's how my brain works, being a secretary, being a manager, whereas the other guys will look at it from the outside and say, it's not that big of a deal, it's overstated, it's understated, and this is how I think that we should deal with an issue. On top of that, management committees as well are really good at understanding how everything should operate and run through your club when it comes to the off season. They can help with your club handbook. They can motivate you to do more on and off the field as well. And lastly, what is your personality type, and how do I plan on communicating with players and volunteers? So typically in football, I'm surrounded largely by adult male groups. As I'm getting a little bit older, I've got a little bit more exposure to how female and disability football works as well. And I have a very firm basis in saying that the way that you operate football at different age groups really matters, and the way that you communicate matters a lot. At the moment, I'm honest enough to say that I don't feel that I would be in a position where I could manage or speak to children or underage groups in a proficient way. I've done my courses and I feel confident in doing that, but I don't have any experience in actually doing that. I also feel like I've got a temperament that one day will be suited to that as I learn patience. Though at the moment, in 2023, I'm very much along the lines that I'm suited for adult male football. I understand the environment. I understand the necessities about what you need to go through every single week. And also on top of that, I can also have empathy with players if they're having a bad time, and I can communicate with them in a full and effective manner. I did have a conversation with my captain Vince at the club, and he said that when we do eventually one day get a women's team up and running, it would be great to see a female figurehead run the club, purely because they'll have that same level of empathy that I do running the male team as it would be having the female team. Notwithstanding that a man can do it, and females are largely few and far between currently in the grassroots game, and the FA are trying to bridge that gap with female involvement, though you just have to be wary on your personality type. Me personally, if I'm going to excruciatingly go on the internet and say the type of person that I am very much a calm and methodical person. It's taken me a while to really warm up to how I want to talk to people in terms of running the football club. Some of my team talks when I started were very quiet. They were very unassuring because I wasn't confident in what I was saying. There was a little bit of hesitancy on me really having a command of my own voice. And finding your voice in football, if you've never done it before, takes a lot of time and work and energy. And largely it's just for experience. You're never going to learn or develop or grow your skills if you're in a position where you never really go head deep into it and discover what you like to do as a manager as well. Though what I would recommend is you need to kind of understand how you're going to talk and just lean into it in a really good way. If the players are going to respond to you in a positive way, then that's great. And then if you're going to get a lot of pushback or fight back on the types of things that you're saying, or the manner in which you're evoking in a game day or a training sense, then you can always review it as well. There's no perfect way, and what I'm saying to you and to everyone online is that it's not about being perfect, it's about having the right base to be able to talk to people. The 3 coaches that I've trialled at my football club, and we'll go into it briefly, the main issue that I've got is that they're just not good communicators. They don't know how to deal with it, with any issues. Because if you don't know something in football, such as you don't know how to plan a training session or how to speak to people, it's very easy to be defensive. And I'm not calling anybody out or making any type of light on people's deficiencies here, but that's been my experience. I'll ask what they could do to communicate better, and they'll say, oh no, I did a great job, I'm doing fine, you need to back off. So largely you need to understand what you are, and if you're an adult that's got kids and you want to coach youth football, you really have to understand how to talk to children. And push comes to shove, if you need to learn it and you don't know where to start, just contact your county FA or your local FA. They will always have a lot of materials online that you can go through as a person to better yourself. And lastly, the other part of the understanding, moving swiftly on, apologies, is understanding your players' mindsets as well. So the first thing that you learn in your coaching badges is that no two people are ever the same. And largely you are dealing with a diverse range of skills, both on and off the field, that can help a football team develop. So again, here I'm speaking to my own personal experience as an adult football coach. I've had some very, very positive relationships with people, some that I don't speak to anymore because they're football friends, some that I do, some that absolutely just love football and that's all we want to talk about all day, every day. So you're never going to have the same understanding or the same relationship with two different people in a football club. At a football club, like let's say you're a grassroots adult team like I am leading on my experience, you're going to have a lot of people that will turn up because they know what it is, but they're going to have varying ways of dealing with things. If they're having a bad game, a great game, they're going to have different ways to talk to people, and then how they communicate with you as well through their frustrations and their success. So you just need to understand that the players have a completely different mindset to you as a manager. You're seeing things in a bigger box than they are. They're seeing things in a fraction of what that you would as a manager. So you have to set up the team, you've got to do all the training or the coaching, you've got to deliberate over the sometimes over late night about, God, what am I going to do tomorrow for the game here? I know that this and this needs to fall into place. So what I would recommend is that lean on your players when you need to. Lean on them a lot. They will be smart to the task as well if you allow them to be. The more involved you allow the player to be in your football club, the more they'll just feel so much more at home in your team as well. So let your players have a voice if you're ever feeling that you need it as well. So next up, we have most players in Grassroots have to pay to play and expect a minimum involvement. So you have to treat their time with respect as they're sacrificing their time to commit to your club. So this is a big one. So obviously, at the higher levels, you have the FA step pyramid, and typically if you're going to be a grassroots coach, you're at the basement of it, so you're going to have to rely on player funding. What type of funding that is will completely depend on your financial situation at the football club. Largely though, what I would stress is that you're going to have to pay for your own trainings and your match days as well, because there are costs involved in running football, such as referee fees, admin fees, as well as paying for the pitch over winter when you're doing 3 and 4G training as well. So typically you're going to have to charge players typically nowadays with the cost of living £5 or more for a session that goes on for an hour over the course of winter. And the last thing that you want anybody to do when you're playing football in the middle of December is to basically make them feel uninvolved. So you need to give them a minimum quota of involvement. You need to give them the maximum amount of touches and time at training with the football that you possibly can. You have to make their time worthwhile. Players largely, whether they're kids or adults, that feel undervalued or that the coach is putting themselves above the players, which isn't the case, you're going to find there's going to be discrepancies. And the last thing that you need to do as a coach is piss off your players. You need to make sure that they're on the same page as you and that they've got a reason to turn up every week. It's the big thing that you go through in a season week to week. It's just the training availability for adult players can sometimes be a nightmare. Sometimes you've got players that are away for weeks on end. There's other life events such as stag do's, birthdays, general availabilities, injuries, work that really catch up with the team. So you need to treat everybody with the utmost of respect so that when you have these times when all of the cards aren't going to line up for you, you need to make sure that you always have a fallback, because the last thing you want to do is annoy a player over weeks over training where you're doing exercises and drills where you're not engaging with players and then you're giving them minimum time at the weekend, maybe 1 or 2 minutes off the bench. For me, personally, that's not an acceptable standard to set when you have to get players to pay over a course of a season. They're paying signing on fees and they're dedicating their time to you. So the more that you involve the club as a whole, the more likely you're not going to run into too many speed bumps over the course of the season. I'm not saying that you're going to eliminate them, but you just basically stem the crisis if there ever is one on the day. So we're going to move on to the next point after I have some water, because it's about 30 degrees whilst I'm filming this today in June. Is that every person, no matter the age group or footballing ability, communicates differently as well. And it's kind of a similar point to the first one as well, but it needs to be stressed. If you're a new manager that's running a football club, and let's say you run your teams through WhatsApp, where you get your availability on a week-to-week basis, in person and online, people will talk to you differently. People might feel more comfortably putting their words into written form, whereas there will be certain players that will be looking for your advice person to person. So you just need to make sure that if you ever notice somebody is suffering at training, they're carrying an injury, they're feeling a little bit despondent, you have to understand the timing and the place. Typically, what I've done in the past and what I've developed to do, and I stick to it now, is if somebody is having an issue or their head's down or they need to speak to a member of management, what I'll always tell them is, how about we get through the session, keep your head up, and then let's have a conversation at the end. Find me at the end of the session. Don't run off to go home early. Let's hash it out in person. If you've got an issue, let's resolve it. Let's move on. Let's work on it. At the end of the day, football players want to be there if they really want to be there. And, you know, nobody ever walks away lightheartedly from a football team. And if you involve yourself as a coach or a manager at the end of a session or in the middle of a session, at the beginning of the session, it doesn't matter. However you want to run your club. My preference is, if you're booking a 4G facility and it costs money, you don't want to stop an entire session for the purpose of one or two people. What you need to do is say, look, let's have a great session and we'll just cover everything at the end. So the next point is a point that managers always have to come to terms with, and that's to do with player availability. Largely over the course of 4.5 years, over Hype Train and every other football club that I've either spoken to or played for whilst we've not been playing, there are some very good similarities that come across every football club, and it's purely to do with player availability. So if you as a manager have high demands and high expectations of your players, nowadays, if you're running a Saturday team in particular, you kind of have to curb your enthusiasm to player availability. And I think it's a fair point to make nowadays. Players will not always be available. Even the dedicated ones will have to be away from football for a time. It might be through injury, it might be through weddings, it might be through events or work or general life. They might not be able to afford it. The last thing that you want to do is make a player feel guilty if they're never available. You don't want to gaslight them. You don't want to make them feel bad. My instinct when I started the football club was that I had a very particular view, and it was a very fixed box on how I thought I was going to operate. I believed that I was going to have one group of players that I could always rely on. And over the course of time, about 50 or 60, 70 player turnover since, where players leave and they move on, and you understand work habits and general life, such as family, you kind of have to appreciate and understand that players will always make themselves available. You just have to trust that when they're going to be around, they're going to give 100%. But you as a coach cannot ever expect players to be around 100% of the time. There's a few weirdos in life that turn up to everything. I'm one of them. I place this above absolutely everything at the moment in my life, though later down the line that may change. I may have a family, I may have other work commitments where it might limit me, as well as illnesses or other types of educational work. So, it's nice if you can, and it's nice to have players around when you can, though do not get frustrated at the player directly. Do not take it out on them. These are some basic fundamentals, because all they're going to do is get their back up, and it's going to make it harder for you to communicate, and they may start to sour on your club and your project. So the next point is to do with respect and feedback. The last thing that you want to do as a manager is to make people feel excluded. We've kind of half covered the point already here, though what I would say to a new manager is that you need to establish types of processes at a football club where you can allow your players to communicate in an open and honest way. I mentioned earlier you could do it at the end of a training session. You could also apply that before a game day if somebody's frustrated, or after a game as well. Or you can do what we do at our team, and we have what is called an escalation policy, where if somebody's really frustrated and they need just to vent, they need to get something off of their chest, they need to talk to somebody, whatever it may be, whether it's about their minutes, about an injury, about their availability, about the way that I'm personally talking to them, you have to allow the players a mode of communication. So they will always give you positive feedback. If it's good and if it's bad, they need to do it as well, because you are not somebody that is immune to criticism as well. You need to be understanding of, you can't ever have the attitude, well, at least in my case, my brain says you can't ever have the attitude of I'm always right, this is how it has to be, this is what I want it to be, and everybody has to fall in line. There are some certain principles in football that you need to keep up with, such as, try to make yourself available, try to always be there, and respect everybody. But you're never going to get far in life if, you never listen to feedback, you're not open to players communicating with you in an effective way to grow and develop. Some of my best development curves in life through football have been where I've had difficult conversations with people that have made me think, and me constructively think about how I'm talking to people, how I'm communicating, how I'm running things. And also, if you really do not like what somebody is saying to you, you can also learn from that as well, because let's say you've got somebody that's speaking disrespectfully, they're floating WhatsApp messages around that are disrespectful behind the club's backs. You learn what is good and what is bad in football through your experiences. So if this ever happens, you need to lean on your gut instincts and just make sure that everybody toes the line in terms of the respect that everybody has to follow through. And the best way to do that is just, as I mentioned, to have all of these channels open to the players. And lastly, the last point that we're going to get onto about understanding grassroots is players, especially in grassroots football, will speak their minds about how things can be better. There are certain players in life that they sometimes don't communicate. They're more than happy just to turn up. Though they will all have a certain opinion, they'll all be understanding football a different way. They can help you grow and develop. My captain Vince, I've mentioned him 1 or 2 times. Lovely guy, coming from across the channel. He's Belgian, and he came in and has a completely different mindset to me in a positive way. We're 2 different types of personalities, so the way that I will view it and the way that he will view it will be the same, but the way that you challenge each other on to make the best decision can be absolutely amazing when you've got somebody that you can go, oh my God, that was such a better way of saying it, or that's a good way of doing it. So you need to understand and have a reciprocal relationship with your players where there's never any hesitancy. You're never going to get the best out of your team and your players if you're ruling with an iron fist and you're genuinely not allowing players or coaching staff or volunteers to have a voice. You all have to go through together, and as a manager, you're part of a cog. It's like when you have a mechanical watch. You have a lot of different cogs, and you may be the biggest piece on the cog, but you need all of the little parts around you to work as well. Otherwise, you have to send it back to, the watch company to fix, and that's the last thing that you need. So just remember, you're one spoke on the wheel. It's an important scope, but you are just one part of that. And apart from that, let's jump into the next topic. So we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty on what coaches do right and what they do wrong. And I want to preface this off by saying that a lot of this has come from my personal experience dealing with a few coaches in grassroots football. And they're all really nice guys. They are all going to be good coaches one day. I do not doubt that. But I'm just going to deal with some of the things that they did wrong. And this isn't as a way for me to be malice or for me to basically out anybody. I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to name any names. What I'm going to just cover is some of the institutional things that they're doing wrong and what they're doing right. So we're just going to cover over some of these bullet points here and then go on to the good side of it as well. So the coaches think that they're above the needs of the team. So what they'll do is create training plans, ignore player requests, and they genuinely view themselves above the health of the football club. So part of the process when so over the summers gone 2-3 years potentially, what I've noticed is that we will meet up as a committee group, or myself or my management team where we'll just basically discuss new managers. Whenever we get one in, we'll always like to talk to them. We'll like to basically see what they're like as a coach, just to understand, what they need in terms of our support if they're going to go about it. So we always allow them time to come and trial with the football club. You never learn if you say no before you let them in. So what we typically do is just try to make sure that they are part of the football club. And I don't know whether or not it's a mental thing. And I don't know if or not I've been cautious or not saying it so far, so I'll just let it say how I need to say it. All the coaches that I've had have all believed that their particular mindset and the way that they want to coach and the way that they want to interact with players and the management staff, they're here, everyone else is down here. So that from day one causes issues. So I'll give one example. We had a trialist coach in over the course of the summer last season in our pre-season. Very young lad, really nice guy off of the football field. I'm not doubting he's a great person, but he came to our second trial session or a second training session, and he already had training plans in mind that he wanted to do. And he already had like a long-term vision, which is fine, but at the minutiae, he had the plans already based on players that may not have even been there. So he was looking at it more from a broader strokes point of view and had training plans and a set plan about this is how we're going to play. He wanted to play out from the back. He wanted to play progressive, attacking, no fear football. But before he even wanted to do that, he didn't even know the players. He didn't know the way the team was set up. He didn't know the way that we were operating. We were getting in trialists at the same point as well. So he was making plans on players that he didn't necessarily know were going to be there. And he was kind of jumping the gun. So he went straight to level 2 or level 3 FA coaching and was skipping out some of the basics. And that's kind of where you need to start. You need to start as low as you can be in terms of your expectations. So if you're starting a new football club, you need to make it simple. I'll go into some of these points afterwards, but this is kind of like covering where they go wrong. My experience is that all the coaches believe that their habits and practices have to be the main feature of a training session, and it kind of takes away from what players are there for, especially where they're paying for training as well. You have to put the players first and foremost. If they're enjoying their experience, they will follow you to the grave. They will follow you into every battle. They will be your soldiers. But first of all, you need to win them over. And you're not going to win them over by having a dedicated plan based on a star forward that may not even be playing, that isn't there for the week's training session. So what I would recommend is that you have to basically factor in the people that are there for a training session or a match day, and you have to lean on the players that you have rather than what you want at that time. I know it's a very hard thing to say, and it's always good to have a philosophy, but you need to first of all understand your players before you can do that. Otherwise, you're just stepping over the mark. So the next point is sometimes they can possess an attitude that they think that they, quote unquote, air brackets, know football better than anyone else as well. That's never true in life. Nobody knows everything. You can have a very, very good overview of football, its rules. You can have played at a good level, or you can manage at a good level, or neither, or there's a bit of a mixture between each. To your own. So what I would largely say is that every single person has a different experience in football. They come from different backgrounds, different environments. They see the game differently from you, though it's never nice dealing with a mightier than thou attitude at games and at trainings. And it happens a lot. It does happen a lot. I was at a youth game a couple of years ago, and there was this dad coaching, and he said to a 7 or 8 year old, I know football more than anyone on the planet. Your instincts and your directions are wrong. Listen to me or get off the pitch. That's not what you need to say to people. It's just that type of mentality should be left at home. You need to make sure that you go in with an open mind. If you go in with an open mind in football and you learn, that is the major thing, because you never have your knowledge ever complete in football. It's an ever evolving development cycle, and Roy Hodgson said in an interview that he's always learning, and he's in his mid-70s. So, this isn't something that you keep developing in. This is a book that just does not have an ending. It's a book that ages like a fine wine over time. So the next part is they can pick favourites in the team and ignore other players. Because this happens a lot. We'll just rip the band-aid off. It happens a lot in kids football. It happens a lot in adult male football, depending on who's running the football club. At youth football, this is sometimes necessary because you have to get people to coach. It can be a dad or an uncle or a parent of one of the team, and I see it all the time. They will give preferential treatment to their kid, probably because they have to go home with him afterwards and they don't want to disappoint him or her. So you just don't want to basically deal with the aftermath of that as well. Though what it does is that it tends to annoy the parents. There can become dissatisfied groups. It's never a good idea to treat anybody as your favourite. My two top goal scorers in the football team, Phil Newport and Leon Mannion, they are the star strikers of our team. They have been for a while. They definitely could have scored a lot more goals than what they've done, but they've also equally scored more, and you can't argue with their output. They're really top guys, and the coaches that we always bring in, and this has been across the board, they look at Leon, who is a very athletic, 6'3", tall guy. He's very quick and rapid. They look at him and view him at our level at Grassroots as a superstar, so they will fixate their plans and their attention around him and Phil or the other gifted players, which will typically exclude defenders or defensive midfielders that have a completely different mindset. And as a left back, I've played in defence my whole life. It's quite arrogant to come in with that mindset, because the skills that you need to read the game are arguably as good to stop the ball going in the net as it is putting it in the net as well. So interceptions and reading play and understanding and being communicative and vocal at the back, it matters just as much as the guys taking it up at the other end as well. But we've had coaches that have literally done a rondo where 16 or 18 of us have been stuck in a rondo. We always have around 20 at a training session. He's put 17 of us in a rondo, and this coach and Phil and Leon just were doing shooting practice for 40 minutes. The 18 or 17 of us were completely forgotten. And even me as a club owner, I was sat there, or pretty much by the end, I was sat there frustrated. I knew that players had paid for this session. It was a paid session on 4G. And at the middle part of the session, I was fearing to all things holy that players were going to leave, players were going to get frustrated. And, you just can't operate like that. You can't have favourites, unfortunately. You can have preferential treatment for players that are turning up all the time, and you can fit in players that are a bit part around that. I completely understand that. But when it comes to just you ignoring other people in the favour of other people, I don't know, it's not the right way that you should ever go about it in life. And this is more a life thing, in a business, in life, or friends, you should always treat everybody with respect. And if you can't do that, then you need to reevaluate what your needs are on a football pitch and what the team needs as well. So I mentioned it in the other part about understanding your players. So sometimes managers can get upset when players aren't available at certain weeks for training and games. Unfortunately, I'm just going to lay the truth bare. You just have to accept it. It's going to happen over the course of a season. You're not going to have 100% attendance from anybody apart from the special few. You're not going to get universal commitment at games and trainings. People are going to have to work late. People are going to have to miss it through family commitments. Unfortunately, what you as a manager have to do is just accept it. It's going to happen. So if you're at a training session and you have two people that have to drop out last minute, it's your responsibility to make sure that you have a backup plan for the session, which means that the people that have turned up, the 16, the 18, the 20, however many people you may have, they will turn up and you put them as the focus. So next up, they don't understand how to communicate effectively with large groups. This is a doozy of a point because, again, it goes back to some of the personality traits that you have to have or have to exhibit with a large group as well. So a new manager will largely have to, on a match day, let's just talk about a match day. So you've got a game coming up, you're meeting at, say, 1 p.m. for a 2 p.m. kickoff on a Saturday afternoon for an adult male game of football. What a manager will have to do is communicate, first of all, where you're going, the kit that you're playing in, all of the little details to get your lads there at the game. And then you're going to have to communicate the warm-up. You're going to have to, or, you can communicate yourself. You can carry it out yourself. You can delegate, depending on your skills. And then you're going to have to do the team talk. You're going to have to go through some basic instructions for your players to follow through. And then on top of that, whilst the game's going on, you're going to have to use your knowledge to inform the players on areas where there needs to be improvement or on the pitch, or to praise people as well. Similar to like when you're playing on Football Manager and you've got a limited options of how you interact with players, you can demand more from them, you can tell them to focus, you can give them a lot of praise, or you can fire them up by saying something on the sideline if it's 0-0 in the first minute of the game. But you just need to understand how to communicate, and sometimes people do not know how to communicate. We did have, and this is one person that did volunteer for the club over the summer as well last year. He wasn't naturally English and he struggled to communicate with a large group, as in he was very, very quiet, very nice person. He knew his football better than I did and he had a very good plan, but he couldn't get it across to the team. If anybody ever in football is like streets ahead of me in terms of how they talk or how they communicate, I'll openly admit it. And this guy knew his football. He was very smart to Grassroots. He had been involved in a couple of other football teams, but hadn't quite found his right voice at a certain football club. And it just so happens that that voice wasn't for us as well. But he knew his football and he understood the game better than anyone in our football team did in terms of how to play at a grassroots level. But when it comes to delivering a team talk, nothing clicked. And the communication was very quiet, and players constantly had to ask, and sometimes there was long delays with him trying to get his point across. And aside from that, I'm not picking on foreign nationalities at all. We had the younger trialist who was still trying to find his voice. He just didn't know what to say to people when they were on the pitch or how to deliver a team talk as well. If somebody asked a question such as you were playing a 4-2-3-1 formation and you basically had a winger ask the manager, what do I do in this situation? And he didn't have an answer, he would just make something out. He'd just make something up on the spot. So that's the kind of things that you have to look out for and be cognizant of. If you're going to manage a team, you're going to get people asking questions. So the penultimate point, they aren't effective at organising training sessions and games. So largely when you're organising football, you have to do two things. You have to organise a training session in midweek if that's the thing that you do. And this is more traditional for youth teams, for Saturday teams. Sometimes Sunday teams just turn up and play on the day. But largely football teams like to train. So you have to be good at communicating where and when and who and why and what. So if you're not a good organiser, you have to either delegate or learn how to be somebody that is good at organising on a quick turnover basis, because football comes at you every single week. If you have a bad week, there's literally no off season until the summer, so it's just every single week you've got to be switched on. If you're feeling down, the club's feeling down, or the club's jubilant, you always have to realise that there's always something else that you have to prepare for. So it's just not something that you can half-ass one week. You have to be consistent, so creating schedules will help with that. But we're going to cover a lot of that on the next slide. And lastly, managers or coaches or anyone that's in my position 4 years ago that wasn't involved in grassroots football, they don't tend to understand how much time and work goes into football. So this is more a broader point about they don't understand the level of commitment in terms of time and hours that you need to invest in. I'm a very odd case. This football team is a large part of my life. I put a lot of my time and effort into my spare time into running this football club. So when we're in the busy part of the season and we have 2 games and a training session, I can spend upwards of 40 to 50 hours dealing with all elements of the football club. But I'm a special case where I do a lot of content around. I do photography. I do a lot of editing. We put stuff onto YouTube. We have a nice video camera that we use to film all of our football matches. So there's a lot of added perks that we have on. So if it was just down to organising sessions and games and training, oh my God, my time would be so much more. But as it stands, I do a lot more, and coaches kind of need to understand that element as well. What can take up a lot of time is communicating with players, and we're going to go on to that shortly. But largely, it was just a little small point about people need to understand how much time and mental fragility goes into running a football team at times. So that that moves us nicely on to the basics of managing and coaching. So this is kind of the inverse of the previous slide, and we're just going to basically go on to what you need to do. So all of the feedback that I've given all of our trial managers over time has basically been condensed into some of these points as well. So saying hello to all of your players upon arrival at an event. Nobody likes being left out. This is a big thing in grassroots football. Everybody, if you're a manager, you have to say hello to everybody. If you ignore people, it's never nice. If you're left out or ignored at work, it's never nice. It's the same at football as well. Football mimics life with elements such as being cordial and polite with everyone. So just follow to those basic principles as well. I've had previous coaches who think they're overthinkers, and what they'll do is they'll just be so focused on their tasks or their responsibilities, they overlook the basics of saying hello. And saying hello is the basics that you need to understand with your players as well, because the last thing that you want is people to be resentful of you when you're giving a team talk, to say, God, he can't even say hello to me, he's just in his own little world doing his own little thing. Just say hello to everybody on arrival and you will have no issues. So again, you need to put the needs of the team ahead of the needs of your own personal coaching needs as well. So this is a good point. We kind of touched on it a lot in the previous part as well. What I would recommend to new football coaches is that you have to work on a week-to-week basis. So let's say, over the course of a season, our recent Sunday team, we had a 24-game Sunday season, and we were training around 32 weeks of the season. So there were some games that got called off. You got a break over Christmas. You need to make sure that you do it week to week. Start on a Monday. So do Monday to Sunday. That's your schedule for a week. So if you're going to have the Monday schedule, put out your availability on the Monday or the Tuesday. Get your training organised, depending on if it's, say, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, well within time. And then play the matches at the weekend, have a period of reflection, and then go again on the Monday. So you need to separate and segment all of your operations so that you can micromanage, or not micromanage, that's the wrong word. You can basically just, you can cut down all of this big picture thing, because that's what you're going to go through as a manager. If you've never managed a grassroots team before, it can feel daunting, because you look at a constitution and it's 15 teams in a league, 14 teams, and you've got a lot of fixtures and a lot of responsibility. You can basically calm down your expectations and just do it week to week. The best that you can do is just wake up every day and do the best. So you don't have to look at 5-10 years in the future. If you need to, as a coach, and you're purely a coach and you're not looking at the big picture, you can just do it nice and calm, Monday to Sunday. Have a set schedule so that your players can understand as well. And apart from that, there's really not much to it apart from organising those elements of your team as well. But when it comes to the putting needs ahead of your players, I've had players leave my football club because they believe that needs of the coaching staff, needs of trial managers, needs of myself have been above their own personal needs as well. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes you get players that are naturally selfish, and their need is to play football for free. They're bad with their money. They can be in debt a lot with the football club, but you're not matching their needs. And sometimes their needs can be irresponsible and they can be negative for the football club. Just keep it that way. Never take it personal. Just understand that there's a fine line between that as well. So just to keep everybody in line, you just have to have a set schedule at training. Make sure you involve the players you have, not what you want there to be. you're not going to have your star players around every week. So just basically work with what you've got and keep people involved from there on out. Next up, remembering that every day is a learning curve and that you will improve over time. That is such a good statement in terms of my personal development as well. 4 years ago, I was a lot more timid, a lot more shy. Since then, you learn to grow communications, you learn how to talk to people, you learn a lot more fluently about the rules of football, and you can set your expectations. So if you ever have a bad day, such as you have a football game where one of your players has been assaulted, they've been hit, you can, the first time that you'll approach the FA, you'll send them, if you have any proof, you'll send them some proof, you'll send your league and then just an overview of what's happened. And if the outcome isn't satisfactory, let's say, there's no evidence and it's all circumstantial, he said, she said, even though there could be like a bruise or anything on the person's body, but there's no resolution, it can be frustrating. If you have had a game where a linesman has cheated you out of the game at the last minute and it's one of their own players, that can be frustrating. There are tons of examples where you can go home and want to kick every single door down off the hinges. I've had many of those days. And 4 years ago compared to now, I kind of needed to go through that stage where you just need to go through those experiences and you need to understand the inner politics of football, and it can take years for you to go through these new experiences. I would say that your development is never over, so the way that I speak and communicate is far different from when I started the football club, and that's purely because I had the added advantage of being able to construe different relationships with different people that allowed me to be more expressive and gave me the confidence. Confidence is the word. You're going to always have a lot of time on your hands to better yourself in football, and the confidence isn't something that you just get from minute one. Even really like more outspoken, more outgoing personality types than my own that are very naturally confident and can command a room more than what I can, they will also be having certain struggles. There's mental health struggles that you go through in football. There's lots of different things that you can basically internally worry about. And I've not met a single manager to this day that has had this thing where they've started at a level and they've maintained that level and they've never really grown or developed. It's always that people, the more time they spend in football, developing football, nurturing relationships, understanding your badges more, doing the whole coaching thing, it naturally happens over time, and you can't force it from minute one. You can't go in. Our first trial manager years ago, he was pretty much came in with a brazen attitude, very confident, very cocky with his ability to manage the football club, and he was very confident, but the confidence was actually, I don't think it was confidence. I feel like he was giving us a bravado. He was giving us a certain way that he wanted to act. He was giving us the big manager treatment as such, probably because he was unsure of his abilities and his skills, and that's why he wanted to create a persona of himself. Because when it comes to actually delivering training sessions on a weekly basis or managing the football team, and for us at the time, he was under par for the level of player and coaching that we needed. It was all just a bit of a smokescreen, and I hope that he's improved, and I've actually got a good relationship with him. I speak with him occasionally, but you can get some people that just have a brazen attitude, and it's all just a cover and a smokescreen. But if you are like that, it's fine. You can develop, you can learn. This game is very easy to pick up over a long period of time, and you will learn how to find your place in football as well, whether or not you're managing any type of football team. So one thing that I would stress to people, and this is to do with creating, I'm going to skip over one point and go back to it, but keeping your communication consistent when speaking with people online and in person is the one thing that interpersonally I think that I've learnt the most from over time. So depending on the players in your football team, you can have different relationships with different people. Certain people will like for you to message them personally, let's say on WhatsApp or text, so that they have written proof of your communication, so that they can hold you to account if you ever don't live up to certain expectations. Then you have people that will want to exclusively deal with you in person. They'll just have a quick chat with you at the end of a training session. But largely what you need to do is just stay consistent. I've got a player called Brad in my team, and he is a very nice guy. And he called me a people pleaser. And it wasn't meant as a negative, but he is completely right. There are sometimes, as a football manager, you sometimes feel the need to people please. You're managing a group of 35, 40 people, and you need to keep, and in, at least your brain is telling you, I need to keep everybody happy. I need to keep everybody, in line. I need to make sure that nobody's ever having a bad day. Nobody can ever be mad with me. Nobody can be mad with the football team. And what it can do is develop traits where you can people please. And I know for a fact that I went through stages of people pleasing. I don't do it anymore as much. In person, I like to be cordial and I like not to be frustrated. Sometimes that fails, but you just have to get on with it. But largely I had a period where I was desperate for players to turn up for my Saturday team. We were struggling for numbers every single week. We got to the cup final on the back of having bare 11s for 3 or 4 of the 5 rounds, and it got really, really tight for me to get players in. So if a player I had one player that had a big, he was griping about not about his minutes, but about feeling respected. And basically what it got to was I people pleased, and I was saying things to him in messages that he was holding me to account for in writing, and then I was telling other members of my committee something else because it kept everybody happy. And one day, the player showed one of my committee my messages, and rightfully they called me out and said, "What the hell's going on? You're telling one thing to one person, you're telling us another thing." And I just said, look, I'm trying to just keep everybody happy. And ultimately what you do is that you make both parties, both interested people in your football club, you give them dissatisfaction. You give them a reason to both be upset. So what I would recommend is that you say to them the same things you say online, and you also say the same answers. If players have the same questions about, let's say, where the club's going, what your views are of them, you just need to keep your wording consistent across management and committee members, because there was a long stretch of time where I believed that I was going to lose players and lose personalities in my football team that I treasure and that I consider good friends, because sometimes my need to try to keep the team together actually turned out to be driving people away, because you need to make sure that everything spoken and written is very much along the same lines as well. So the last thing you want to do is disrupt your football team by people pleasing. And I know it's hard. It's a really hard element, and there's no catering for it, because you have to sometimes do things in football for your football clubs to get them across the line from week to week. I don't apologize for doing it. I just apologize to my squad afterwards, knowing what it had done to them. If I had known then what it would have caused, such as people were unhappy that I was just people pleasing and just saying two things to keep both sets of people interested and along the same page, I just kind of apologize for my actions in hindsight of it. But you need to just basically keep your communication consistent. Switching gears completely from that, with adult football, it's different from youth football as well. When you're running a youth team, what you'll largely have is a WhatsApp group or a form of communication group where you have all of the parents. And dealing with parents is a different matter from dealing with a group of adult players that are responsible for their own actions and their own type of life. So what you need to make sure as well is that with parents in particular, I would stress to communicate as a squad overall and deal with any dissatisfaction or any moaning or any complaints in person as well. Try to keep complaints as a manager offline. The last thing that you need to do is have people bring up 5-year-old messages on WhatsApp where they try to call you out on your actions and what you've done as well. So the next point, I'll go back to it, and it's to do with creating a structure for training and games as well. What I will do in a couple of slides is go over a couple of basic examples of what you could do when you're running your own football club, about how to engage people and how to engage your own timekeeping as well. It's an important factor of running a football club, so we'll kind of skip over that and go on to the next point, but it's there as a bit of a learning curve if you're downloading this and you want to learn, and you've got it in your head about, structuring football sessions. So what I would say though, and it comes on to the next point, is keeping training sessions simple to keep players engaged, to keep player engagement higher. So the next point we're going to go over is creating structures for training and games. We're going to skip over the fourth bullet point because I'm going to go into that into a lot more detail at a later date in the slideshow, which is just coming up. But the final couple of points are to do with keeping training sessions simple to keep engagement high, keeping team talks brief and to the point. So basically these are kind of one and the same thing about organisation. So what I would recommend is, as a new football coach, having just completed my FA level 1, the way that the structure of the course works is that you have to go through 3 weeks of different webinars, and all of the webinars are to do with engagement of coaches and players. So what they'll do is they'll give you lots of different tasty ideas on training sessions, on how to organise match days, speaking with parents. There's a lot of different assets and resources for you to download, but the main thing that I learned from that course was to do with training sessions and how to engage your players, whether it be through small-sided games, larger-sided games, and they just kind of went from there. And the main thing that they said, especially when you're new, and I would also stress this as well, this isn't just me regurgitating what the FA have said, from my own personal experience, I would say that if you've never coached and you're looking to get into it, you don't need to do drills. You just can play football. Get your lads up. For, let's say you've booked out a 4G facility, it's going to cost them £5 each for the hour. Don't waste their time with drills. What you can do is learn over time how to effectively incorporate them to match the skills and the needs of your team. But what you should be doing from minute one, day one, is learning how to play football. So if you've got a training game, if you're bored of just playing a normal standard game where you've got 2 teams and 1 football, add in a scenario, do touch limits in case you want your players to express get their passing abilities up, to work through channels, to work under pressure. If you would like to basically start the training session with a small-sided game and throw in 5 different ways to score, that's a really good drill where you get to get players figuring out how to get different types of assists from a cross, from a low drill, from a left-footed shot, from a right-footed shot, from a chest shot, and everything. You can get, so there's loads of different ways that you can engage with players, and instead of me wasting your time talking about the different ways of doing that, what I would recommend doing is go to the FA Coaching Community website, and you just Google that, FA Community Coaching, and what you will be brought up with is a website where you can basically sign up on the FA and have access to a lot of resources to help your personal development, your coaching, your teams. But largely what I would do is get your teams in order, give them scenarios in trainings, give them scenarios that replicate the game so that you can do anything you want, but just to keep players' engagement high. The worst thing that you need to realize is when a player doesn't touch the football much at training, if they're not allowed to take a shot, if they're not part of a shooting drill, if they're not part of something, they'll feel so abject when they go home. They'll say, I've paid £5 to play football and I've touched the ball 4 times, and 2 of them me doing keepy uppies before we got going. So to keep that high, to keep that level of engagement high for players, make sure you're playing football, give them a scenario, and you should have no problems. At the end of the session, what you can do is offer feedback and ask players what they would like to do differently. And if over a long period of time, if players would like to come to you and say, I think it's time that we do a drill, I think it's time that we engage the players differently, make the players come out of their shells whilst they're comfortable before you jump into that. But if you're day one and you've got a new football team, the last thing that you need to do is weigh them down with needless things that you don't need to do in pre-season. Get the fitness up, get players' touches in, and keep everybody's engagement high throughout the summer before you start. That's basically what I would say. And the final point to do with team talks and making yourself available to players with if they ever have feedback or doubts. We've kind of covered that. It's a lot to do with the way that you address players, keep it consistent, make sure that you make yourself available to and from a session. All of these points here on this bullet point list are basically the essentials. You just want to turn up on time, you want to greet your players, you want to make sure that everybody feels respected, give everybody as much as they possibly can from a session. If you do all of these basics, such as keeping it simple at training, keeping it simple at match days to begin with, you're not going to have many people causing you issues. The issues that I find from my experience having dealt with free trial managers is that people get disengaged when the coaches start to do things that they think are good just for the sake of doing them, and the fact that they're struggling to know how to communicate with a large group of players. So what we will be going through now is training sessions. So what we're going to go through is just basically some of the basics that you need to understand before you get going. So what is the size of the pitch that you're going to be training on? Are you training in the summer on a big pitch so you've got an endless open amount of space? Or are you going to be training on a 4G pitch, which will limit the size of what you have to play with, whether it's in a cage, a five-a-side ground, or whether or not you're leasing half of a football pitch for an hour, and how many people you're going to have between 16 and 20 people. What you also need to gather and understand is how much time you're going to have on the football pitch as well. If you have a plan in mind for an hour or 2 hours or 3, it's all going to depend on a few circumstances. So one thing that you need to consider right off the bat is if the players are going to be late because the car park's absolutely rammed, parents picking up their kids from football sessions earlier, are you going to have groups of players still on the pitch that are taking ages to get off? Are you going to have a lot of equipment such as goals that you don't need on the football pitch at the time? So you kind of need to factor in, when you turn up to training, get your players engaged ASAP to get the pitch set up to how you need it to, whether or not you're doing a game or drills. Let's say you're doing a game, you need to clear all of the external five-a-side pitches off the pitch. You need to make sure as well that you have the right goal set up. You have to set up the teams as well, so you need to factor this into your planning for a session as well. So my recommendation is purely to be there a little bit earlier to make sure that you can do the right setup depending on what you need as well. So on top of that, you need to figure out how many players you need, and also majorly the equipment that you need as well. So footballs, bibs, cones, a whistle for you to use in case you need to stop the drill for a second or stop the game for a second, maybe a whiteboard to demonstrate to the teams, because people can be visual learners as well. So let's say you're setting up a team, you just have on one side the team in bibs and the other the team in not bibs, so just so that they can understand their positions as well. It helps with your communication and how they approach the game as well. You could also have a watch such as a Fitbit that tracks the time, or a stopwatch so that you can plan your sessions accordingly. For years I'm the type of person, I don't like to wear watches when I'm playing. I don't like to wear the bras that have the player trackers on me. I'm very much I like to be as light as humanly possible. So I usually have a whistle. I'm going to have to force myself to get a watch so that I can start monitoring the sessions more. But you need somebody that can basically tell you, Rob, it's 9 p.m, our session's over. So apart from that, though, the main equipment that you need, I'd just say footballs and some cones. You don't need a lot else, because you can kind of fit everything else up there. You'll have footballs up there, but just make sure you bring the correct amount of footballs. It depends on what you're going to be doing. 10 is a big number if you're just playing some football games, so you can maybe bring 5 or 6. Though if you're going to be doing some more warm-up drills where you're using the football, some small-sided games as well, it's always better to have 10 as an ideal size number as well. Also, the big ball bags that you buy, that you can buy off anywhere, such as Amazon or one of those sports outlet brands such as Newits, or even Sports Direct, I guess, if you want to plug Mike Ashley. You can just buy, they're equipped for 10 footballs pretty much, so 10 to 12. So that's kind of a good number to have as well. You're going to go through a lot of footballs throughout the season. You can find them popped, some footballs that are delivered are never good enough and you have to return. You just, God, I went through in my first season about 50 footballs. I swear to God, I spent almost my money buying footballs for the football team. It was just relentless. At one training session, we had 5 or 6 that went missing, never got them back. Just one session. So this all matters with your training. After training, who's going to help get all of this stuff as well? So yeah, that's kind of the basics before you really get into the planning stages of it. So let's just jump straight into the training organisation of it. The first bullet point, do not plan your training session until you are confident of the numbers you have available. If you do, you are planning for players who may not even be there and taking the needs of those you have into consideration. So I've kind of made light of this in a couple of previous slides as well. So if you are going to be playing a game that's tailored on finishing, doing some drills that are tailored on passing, doing some interpersonal skills to build up the team bonds, you really need to know what group of players you're going to have available. Let's say you've got 4 or 5 regular players that are away from the team and they're not there for a training session. Just work with the players that you've got. The players and the groups that you will have at the weekend will be slightly different from what you always have in your head. It's always nice when you have your group, your full contingent of players, though largely you're not going to find that. Injuries mostly will take this away from you over the course of a season, players having lives as well. So just plan for what you have. So if you've got 16 players that are really good at passing the ball, but they're really, really, really timid in front of goal and you're not scoring enough goals, maybe do a game where you're encouraging people to shoot more, maybe taking less touches so that you can get the play focused on 1 touch on a shot, 2 touch shooting, focus on crossing, heading, just anything that can encourage your players to come out of their shell and take a shot, for example. So one other bit that you need to go through is, of course, to do with dropouts on the day. The most anxious times of the week. So we train at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday, and the most anxious times for me in terms of organising a training session are between 5 and 7:30, when you get the dreaded message from a player saying, oh my God, I'm stuck in traffic, I'm in, say, London, or I'm out and about, I just cannot get there, my car's broken down and I don't know how to get there. This will happen more frequently than not. You'll get a lot of people saying, I'm ill, where they'll be saying, look, I tried to fight it, I tried to get better for the session, but it just hasn't happened. So this will naturally happen to you, and you just have to be braced for it on the day. You have to be quite a quick thinker. I've had a player, when, let's say, you're running a training session with 20 players. I had one session where I had suddenly 3 people that messaged me whilst I was either setting up on my way to, or just didn't turn up and they were ill or late from work. They just couldn't make it for anything. So first thing to do is not to get mad at the players. Don't get mad at the time, because your focus at that period is to get that session recalibrated. You have to work quickly to say, oh my God, I need to change the goalpost to still keep it engaging. So one of 2 things, you can either have a full-out plan for a training session with slightly less players. You can mix up the rules in a game sense, or you could even do a couple of drills if the time is right for the players and what you have available. Or what you do is you can rewrite the teams that you're doing for a game on the last minute, but you will have to deal with, at some point, players dropping out, players, it happens all the time at 5-a-side, 7-a-side. It's exactly the same at grassroots football as well for larger 11-a-side teams. So just be braced, that is always going to happen. And over time, first year, Rob, I was very much, I didn't like it. Second year, Rob, I was a little bit frustrated by it. Third and fourth year, Rob, I'm a little bit more attuned to understanding how to be different, and not different as such, but understand that this is happening for a reason and it's not a negative. So I don't let it get the better of me anymore, and you kind of just plan on the spot. And as soon as you can beat that hurdle where you get frustrated, I kind of wish that new managers could skip that step altogether and just have a functioning brain, which I didn't have for a couple of years, where I'd be a bit pent up and a bit frustrated. I'd be going, God, I've ruined the session. If you think like that, it will be a bad session. So now I'm able to recalibrate my brain. I will immediately go to the whiteboard that I've got, which has some of the session plans on it, and I'll get to work on thinking of alternatives whilst the team are warming up, whilst they're still arriving. So you could get them starting a small-sided game as well to begin. So let's say you do have the 17A team, get a small-sided game on a quarter of a pitch going that emphasises passing, quick flow movement, and then it will give you 10 minutes for you to calm down, to focus, to be able to redraw the lines so that you still can deliver a good session. And let's say you do have odd numbers, it's always a good idea sometimes to have a midfielder play as a proxy in midfield, as the free man, the floater, that can always engage with the team that has the ball. So then you've still got even teams and a floater that can create an overload on either end of the football pitch, which is a lot of stuff that they cover in the FA coaching courses as well, to get players uncomfortable, to get them defending more compact and narrowly. Elements like this to engage people happens when you throw situations at players, and that was what I was talking about at different situations. Throw in a wildcard player, throw in overloads. So as soon as you can kind of co-opt that into your thinking and be cognizant that this will happen to you, sometimes a player's dropping out, the better you will be in the long term. Sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. Granted, I was like that, but over time it eases and you can kind of understand it. Lastly as well, I would always stress that a warm-up is important, purely because you need to do some dynamic stretching before a training session, before a game, to make sure that your players don't pick up any injuries. If you've got a small squad in particular, I would say get them doing a tiny little bit of running, a lap of the pitch, and then get into some dynamic stretches. For this, you can Google on YouTube. We'll also be doing a future podcast where we go through warm-ups. We'll be going through different variations. We'll be going through everything. So hopefully that won't be too far down the line. But there's a lot of aid and guide out there that can help you and your particular needs and your players on how they can get the best out of their training. So moving on, I've just got some good session plan tips. So be the first to arrive, as you may have some setup on arrival, such as moving goals, organising the warm-ups, organising teams, collecting money. These are all pertinent points. Whenever I'm unfortunately a few minutes late, or I think 4 years it's happened a handful of times, but if you're there earlier, you have more control over your destiny with the planning of your training session. If you're turning up late as well, you just need to make sure that you can either communicate with your players, okay lads, get everything off of the goals. If you've got a WhatsApp group, communicate that to the players as well. So I'm very much aware now of, if I'm ever late, that you just have to hand over responsibility. If somebody's up there and the pitch is empty, or you're on a grass pitch, just allay any fears that you're going to be too late. And yeah, just really simple stuff, but always be the first to arrive, especially if players want to speak to you before a session as well. So if a player wishes to speak with you, ask them to do so at the end of the session. I've already mentioned it 3 or 4 times. It's the best way to do it. It alleviates fears for them in the training session. It will give them reassurance that you'll be able to speak to them at the end. And also, you're going to be limited for time before a training session. So the best thing to do is just say, look, I'm going to talk to you at the end of the session. Come and find me. We'll talk in private. We'll arrange to talk another time, but let's just have that initial conversation now, so that we can then later on down the line improve and sort out any issues or praise or anything. It could be anything, any type of feedback. I'm leaning on the negative because I'm thinking about a player would largely be frustrated. Sometimes the players, when it's good, they don't come to you. Largely it's when they're slightly frustrated, they're coming back from an injury, they're not feeling great, they're not getting enough minutes on the pitch, and sometimes they just need reassurance. They need your perspective on how they're doing so that they can improve at a training session as well. So next up, as a new coach, prioritize playing structured games. You need to learn your players and they need to enjoy playing football. If you throw drills at players without purpose, they do not respond well to this. I touched on it before. It's exactly that. In the FA Week 1 webinar, you basically, you've got 4 FA qualified coaches. They're all very smart. They're all very informative about their information. They all actually agree on one simple purpose: to play football games. So what you would do in a game is just set some boundaries, set some perimeters, as I mentioned before, creating overloads, creating an extra man in possession for the team that's got the ball, having they did a good drill called Fox in the Box, which was about organising your team to score in 5 different ways for you to win the drill. You can also do a structured game where a player's goals mean less throughout the session. So the first goal is 3, the second goal is 2, the third goal is 1, so that when they get to the 1, they can then focus on passing to a player that needs to score. So you have a higher scoring game, which is more inclusive of you passing or managing to pick out a player on the game that hasn't scored. You can then have team captains that can maneuver players so that they can maximize the scoring potential of a team. And then you put the burden of responsibility on them. They learn more. They learn how to talk to each other. They learn how to communicate. And most importantly, when you're a manager on the sidelines, you need to have trust in your players as well, that they're going to organize themselves the best of their abilities. So doing this type of stuff and simulating games at training is the best thing to do. So, the next up, this is the big one. Player engagement is king. The more repetition, touches, shots, tackles, saves, general actions that you do in a game, they make the sessions better. So if you're doing a session and you have a player that touches the ball 3 times, or the defense is bypassed, the midfield in a game, is bypassed, and the defense just does a long ball to a forward, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that happens for the whole session and the midfielders are just going over their shoulders, they're just not getting the ball, you can find that to be frustrating. So you just need to make sure that you give the right type of engagement to players. The more they touch the ball, the better the session. So you can do small-sided games at the start, but when you're getting into the main crux of it, the one thing as a coach that you need to make sure is that your players aren't being selfish, and you coax that out of them through doing different style drills, different style games, to make sure that they can hold each other accountable as much as what you can as well. So, and the final point is about standing around and doing nothing. So I'm going to go back to an experience I had with one of our trial coaches. I had booked out an 11-a-side football pitch on a 4G. It was our 3rd session back over the summer, and if you don't know, the cost of 4G or 3G, however you want to word it, artificial pitches is godly expensive. So I had taken the effort to spend more money so that the session was running at a loss, and we were using the full 11-a-side pitch. It was great to have for the players. It was a nice hot day where players could stretch their legs, get some good fitness, get some running in, and we had a coach who was he basically stopped the game to address 2 people, and you have 22. We had about 24 players that game, so we just had 12 on the pitch. We had a couple of people that we were giving special instructions to. He stopped the game, and there were 22 people stood about for maybe 6 minutes, and nothing had happened. So he was talking, this was the quiet coach, he was talking to the players privately on the pitch, to the point that there's all of us are just looking around at each other going, what's going on? What is going on? To the point that we got frustrated, like, okay. And it got quite tasty because there were some people that were like, take it off the pitch. If you're going to talk, take it off the pitch. And, it got quite heated, and we thought we were wasting our time. So a coach in this instance, and I know the players were wrong with the way of, basically screaming, get off the pitch and do it on the side. Largely, though, it's actually true. You need to, if you're a coach, ask for the 2 players in question to go over to the side of the pitch and address your concerns with them, or how to do this or how to do that, and then say, okay, do this the next time you go onto the pitch. If you're looking to control a ball a certain way to open up space so that you can involve a forward player or a defender, let's say you're playing on the left wing, and your touch is basically taking the ball away from a potential pass, and you want to just talk about that on the side, do it on the sideline, and then tell the players to keep playing, and then insert the players back into the game when you have an opportunity. That way, the players that you're intended to speak to improve their own development can actually learn on the sideline, and then they can then go on the pitch and practice what they've learnt as well. You'd never learn anything, and it can be quite stressful. The 2 players in question, I don't feel listened to the person, because there was a lot of pressure on 22 sets of eyes looking at a group of players stood around doing nothing. They just wanted this conversation to be done. They didn't want it to last more than 10 seconds because they wanted the session to keep going. So you eliminate any negatives over the positive feedback or the construction of what the coach was trying to get at if you just pull them to the side of the pitch and keep the session going, so that everybody can stay in rhythm and stay in flow. And that's probably the biggest go away point as well. So I'll just bring up one training plan idea, and it's kind of a similar training plan to what we run. So we have half a football pitch for 1 hour on a Wednesday evening, and I always advertise if we're starting at 8 p.m. for my players to arrive 10 minutes early. This could be so that I could organise them into their teams, for example. We could get the warm-up started earlier, generally so that I know who we have, so that I as a manager can structure the players, so we can tick off people on a register, so that we can know the numbers, so that we can just get going. So as soon as it hits 8 o'clock, you've got that hour, that precious hour in the week where you're only training once or twice a week for you to maximize your time on the football pitch. So if you don't have any time on the pitch beforehand, you could then say 8 o'clock, let's go. We'll do a 5-minute warm up, quick run around the pitch and some dynamic stretches whilst I as a coach am organising for the rest of the session. Then what you can do to stimulate players to get a lot of touches in is do a small-sided game. So you can do a couple of 5-on-5s, 6-on-6. If you wanted to, you could do some goalkeeper training whilst you do a 7-on-7 or an 8-on-8. The options are limitless. It completely depends on how many people you have at your whim on any given week. But just get everybody engaged, touches on the ball, scenarios for 5-a-side, 6-a-side, 7-a-side football, so that their heart rates are up, they're engaged, they're planning the session, they're really into it. So then when you expand it into the open session, they're more likely going to be relaxed, they're not going to be as frustrated that they haven't touched the ball in a bigger game scenario. So then everybody can kind of just be on ease so that the session runs smooth. You can then organise a bigger game at the end of the session, 8-on-8, 9-on-9, 10-on-10, and you can just go through some of those different forms of game formats that you can play as well. And this is all important because, sometimes this is a very simple plan. You start, you do a warm-up, you get a couple of games of football going that engages people in different ways. You can run a few scenarios, and then as soon as it hits 9 o'clock, it's done, right? You don't want to go home and say, God, I did a drill where I touched the ball once, I didn't touch the ball at all, I was defending, doing nothing, I was just a pawn, you could have just put a cone in my place. This is all feedback that I've got. I had one brutal player in the past who's no longer with us who said, I might as well be a cone. We were doing a drill that was basically a 7-on-8 scenario where I had 4 defenders and 3 midfielders playing a low block defensive drill, which is basically I said to the defenders, do not step out of this 5 or 6 meter line. This is how low block teams play against us. And I was asking the attacking team to break down the low block team. And the players that were defending, one of them got very frustrated with me and sent me a message afterwards saying, you may as well have put a cone out for training. And if the player hit the cone, because he didn't feel engaged that he was touching the ball. He was doing a lot of shape work and organising and running off the ball. And once in a blue moon, you have a right to do this if your team needs structure and literal shape. But I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm more here about the feedback. But the feedback at the end of the session was brutal. It was players that just really wanted to, made their feelings known. And sometimes you're not going to get players with the correct way that you want to speak to them, but they say it nonetheless. So you have to just take it on board for the content of what they're saying. And the content was, we weren't touching the ball. We felt like everyone else on the attacking team was touching the ball. The defensive players were lucky to touch the ball once, and that was when we had either won the ball or we made an interception or a tackle. So, so I took away from that the players weren't feeling engaged, that were defending. So you don't want to repeat that drill too many times in case the players don't react to it. So that's something that you learn on the fly as well. This is kind of like the basics of a thing. If you're a day one manager, I would try to stick to a plan similar to this. This way your players will get value for money. It's easy, well, not easy, but it's manageable for you to coach. It's got very clear guidelines on how the player should act, their responsibilities, and then from there you can just input your own guidelines on how you want to act, play, train, and etc. And then everybody goes home and they have a clear mind about what they'll be doing next week and the week after, as long as you communicate that well with your players. So we're just going to go on to one other point about Matchday Organisation, which is slightly different from training, but it kind of follows along the same line, just to get these day one managers, get the juices flowing about how they need to organise it. So what I would recommend is, if you're playing, say, on a Sunday morning at 10:30, my ideal time is to arrive an hour before. It gives you then enough time to get changed, to get ready, to go to the toilet, for you to do an effective warm-up. When you're a manager, most Sunday mornings when I go up to our home ground at Calcott Recreation Ground, I'm up there at 8:30 in the morning to set up everything for a 9:30 arrival. We unfortunately have to lug all of our goals. All of our goals are individual pieces that clip together, and they're heavy pieces. The goalposts are about 20 foot long. You just need to make sure 15 foot maybe. I don't know the exact dimensions, but you've got to drag everything down about 150 meters downhill on a windy pitch, usually raining in the morning. So I'm usually up at 7:30 to be there for 8:30, so that then we have a rota for players to turn up, at 9:30, so that then there's a half an hour setup period, so that at 9:30, all you have to do is just do all of the actions that your team would do, such as arrive, do the warm-up, get changed, go to the toilet, sort out any pre-match things that your team go through, depending on the team and the nature as well. So it's a really big, important point, and sometimes it's undervalued how much time people spend going to sessions before games. There's not a lot of love or a lot of people that know how much time you put into going up and doing pre-setup for match days, and it's a lot. You don't get many volunteers. You kind of have to force people sometimes out of the house. The best thing that I did was set up a rota. My captain Vince said, I'm not coming down until you set up a rota, because you need to learn how to install that into the team. So get it going, force it on the players, so that so that every week you get different people coming down, talking with the management team, organising it, talking about life, getting a bond with each other that you need to understand and appreciate with guys that you want around your team for years and years. And it's all really good stuff. And then, apart from that, when you turn up, and my whole wider point was the time flashes by. You think you have an hour, but it feels like 5 minutes. It really does. The time just goes so quickly, especially if you're enjoying it and talking to a lot of people. The time flies by, which is why you need to be always aware of your time. So when you do all of that, you go down to the pitch. You'll usually have a team sheet with you, which is just a little bit of paper with some of the details. Your league will usually supply these to you. What it covers is the names of your players and a signature from your club officials. So I'll sign it and date it and put my team name as well as the player names as well, so that there's an understanding of my registered players. Then the opposing team comes and collects it, or you go over to them. You also have to hand it to the referee so they can identify your players in case of any incidents or any goal scorers. So that it's just nice and easy to organise it. Sometimes teams don't have this, which causes issues and a lot of frustrations. My recommendation is always have a spare, so that you can just hand to the away team and then they've got no issues. And if you don't have any more, press your league for some. But yeah, that's probably what I would say. Just ask the opposing team if they have one. If they don't, give them one, so that you can then have, because at the end of the day, let's say somebody's fielded an ineligible player who can't play in the game. That's not right. So, you need to be able to act on that accordingly and quickly, because there's some leagues, our Sunday League, the Reading District Sunday League, you can't contest a game 72 hours after it's played. So if it hits the 73rd hour and you send an email saying, I think this player is ineligible, doesn't matter. They will not look at it. So you need to act promptly. Within a couple of days afterwards, you need to get all your evidence in. And if this ever is the case, you need to make sure that you have your team sheets in hand as well. That's a big part of it. So that's probably what I'd recommend. But it takes a minute to fill out. Just writing out the players' names. It's not too much hard work. And you don't need the best handwriting. You just need to be punctual with, how you get it done and have that with you every single week. Aside from that, you do then have to go through all of the team's warm-ups alongside the players and the captains. If you have some senior members of the team that you can help delegate this to, they can run that. I have 2 or 3 people in my team now. We do the same warm-up every time, so everybody knows the warm-up and the structure. And what I do is I basically give the power to the senior captaincy figures in the team to be able to do it, so that then they can interact with the players whilst you're doing stuff like writing out a team sheet, finalising your tactics and your formations. And then after that, this is the natural step. You do your kickoff, your pre-match team talk. You talk about the team, your expectations, how you'd like them to play. I wouldn't go too much into the tactical side of it, because what in an ideal world you've done is covered all of this in excruciating detail at a training session or prior to the game. The game needs to be very simple, detailed, bullet points for the players to take in mind. Like, let's say you're playing on a really windy or wet pitch and you just need to make them aware of the circumstances. The ball might fly a little bit more. You've set up in one way where the ball's just going to fly over everybody's heads because of the wind. So you just have to say a few things to switch people and engage them on the environment that you're playing. But that's natural. You'll kind of understand that. The players will get a grip to that as well. But you just need to cover all the basics. Then lastly, the final bit of communication is you talking on the sideline, you demonstrating that you can communicate with your players and your substitutes accordingly. It's an understated part, but so in the first 3 years, I was purely playing. I was player manager, coaching, doing all the bits offline, doing all the photo editing. It takes up a lot of time. But I was also playing as well because we were in need of numbers. Also, I was used to playing, and in Hype Train history, we've only really had 4 or 5 left backs that have ever come along. Some of them haven't stuck around for long. But this season, we had a young lad from uni called Tom come down, and he basically played left back alongside one of our other players, Nikhil, who had to leave to go to Dubai. And, that made my life easier. I always said to the right guys in the team, the committee that I run, that if somebody came in that could take my spot so that I could purely focus on helping organise the team on the sidelines, I would do it. And largely, I believe I've stuck to that. And it's taken a long while for somebody to come and displace me that was going to be sticking around. But now I'm in that position and I've got people that I can trust around me. The difference with having a manager on the pitch and on the sidelines is quite vast. In our season, we won the EBFL President's Cup. It was honestly the best day of my life. It was not even close. This football team has been years in coming for me. It's like the first thing that I did as an adult where I had real structure and purpose in life. It got me out of the house a lot more. I've got my best friends in life through this team. And honestly, when that final whistle went, I've never felt any relief like that. But I was playing, and I was nothing but playing that whole season. We were struggling for players on the 11-a-side team, and every week, by necessity, I was playing on the pitch. And I don't get too many left backs in Reading come across to tell me. So I was just in a position where I was playing, and some of the feedback I'd got from a couple of players was very similar, that it would be so good if we had a voice on the sideline, somebody that could see the game and make changes when we needed to. When sometimes I was playing and I was having to, manage on the go, sometimes I wasn't seeing stuff that other players were getting frustrated about, that they needed to correct in a game, and there wasn't really anyone on the sideline to direct or to change things in the flow. And what they were telling me is that they needed a manager that could see the game and understand the game and understand their things and their communications, because they were trying to speak to me as a manager and a player, and sometimes you can't do both. So that's kind of where the players' frustrations were lying. And now that last season was largely on the touchline, and there were some frustrating days where I was used to playing, and you kind of have to understand your new role. I had some very frustrating days where in my head I was going, oh my god, I need to be playing. This team needs to kick up the bum through other means. And I never really did it. I was very hesitant to do that because you need to still enforce trust with your players, but it can get to you a little bit, the frustrations, some of these little details that go on in your head. So it's just, you need to have that patience. But largely the players this season said, you know what, it's been so nice having an outlet on the sideline that's in the game with us. They're seeing the game with us. They're talking and communicating with us. And this has taken a lot of time to organise and to get right. And I still don't think it's completely perfect, but it's a start nonetheless. And I would say as a new manager and a new coach, if you really want to lean on the managerial side of things, you're probably going to have to limit your time playing. Unless your team is all set up around a group of friends, or you only have 10 players without you, then your hands are tied and, you have to, roll up the socks quite literally and get playing. And but when you've got a larger team and there's more elements that you need to control in a match day, I would say your best bet to learn your patience and your control and how you want to communicate will be with you on the sideline, with you communicating with your players in a manner in which doesn't annoy them. Largely, I don't think that players ever react when you're screaming at them. I get frustrated, and I was making some frustrated comments last year because we only kept 2 or 3 clean sheets, and it was every single shot we seemed to concede last year, there was a good chance it would go in. There was a lot of bubbles, a lot of deflections. Wind would take a lot of our goals. It was a very frustrating year to try to keep my emotions in check in a different position. But the best you can do is just, make your players aware that you're there and that you're trying to uphold and keep everything in line when nothing's going right for you on the day, or everything is. If you have great days and bad days in football, probably you think about the bad days more than you do the good, because I at least like to reflect on what I've done wrong and what I can do better. But it's always better if you want to just purely coach to be on the sideline so that you can take that fight and run with it throughout the season. And yeah, that's pretty much covers that. So what I would then recommend is with the manager conduct, and this is kind of what I was already spilling into. My apologies if I can get the... Here we go. Sorry, my computer was a little bit slower there. So basically, with conduct with managers, the first bullet point reads, how you carry yourself is picked up on by the players. So try to only be positive and confident. Do not let players feed on the negativity on the sidelines. This applies at any age group, and I kind of already hinted on it with some of my conduct last season. Largely, I had some really good games on the sideline where everything flowed well, but the games that we weren't doing so well in, or we were up against a group of adults that were just there for a fight or looked just to cheat for the game, sometimes your emotions can get the better of you, and if your players feed on that too much, it doesn't help bring up the team. So you kind of almost have to be, as a manager, longer picture. You're not going to learn this overnight, which is why you have to develop, but over a long period of time you kind of have to learn how to live outside of your body in regards to your decision making. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience, and when you're as invested as I am with a football club, it can be so frustrating when nothing's going your way and people aren't listening. It happens, but you just have to make sure that you just conduct yourself in the best way. And sometimes maybe my negativity on the pitch is fed off to players and they then can use it as an excuse to do it. At younger age groups as well, more importantly at younger age groups, you don't want to have parents on the sideline that are screaming or shouting abuse at their kids, because they will then in turn think that that's a normal way to speak on a football pitch or how to act on the sidelines. The FA guidelines, they're very clear on respect. You need to always be respectful whether or not you're a player, a volunteer, a referee, anyone in football. You have to abide by the same principles. Though largely whether or not that's carried out is a whole other different matter. I would largely say that parents at football games are great. From my experience, you always just get the one though that turns up and he's living out his kids' fantasies in his life because he could never do it as well. So, he's too invested and he's treating it like I am dealing with an adult when he's speaking to, say, a 5 or a 6-year-old who doesn't quite understand football as much as what the dad does, but the dad expects the kid to be better than he is because, he expects him to score in a World Cup final one day. And, there's only been a couple of players that have ever done that for England. So, chances are slim if it's just going to be a dad on a park on a Sunday. I'm not saying that it couldn't, but in terms of the attitude and respect, players need to curb and, bring it down a level so that people can understand. Next up, do not make promises to players if you're not going to keep them. An example, if a sub asks you how much time you're going to give them and you reply with you're coming on at half time and you do not follow through, the player could become upset. It is better to see how the game goes and communicate as a squad. So you know what I said earlier about in the point about being consistent with your communication. This is one element that you need to be consistent with, and this falls in the same category. I have played foul to this a couple of times. Over time, I've gotten a lot better at it, but largely there have been some games where I've been like, yeah, don't worry, we're going to do great, and you'll come on at half time. And that hasn't happened. And then players get so frustrated because they've said, well, he said something and he hasn't followed through on it. So, in that instance, I'm in the wrong. The player is upset. He's frustrated. And yeah, I completely agree with the player. As a manager, you have to be upfront and honest with them. Sometimes they're not going to like it. Sometimes players come off the pitch in a strop, in a mood. They don't understand why they've been taken off. Because they pay subs, money for games, they expect the maximum. And when they get taken off, they don't feel like they're getting what they do. And it can happen with subs as well. They feel like they're being underappreciated. They're playing their way. Why aren't they playing? And it's a thing of life, you will not be able to keep everybody happy. But the one thing that you can do to basically get everybody online and in line with how everything should work is purely by keeping it consistent. If you're going to say to somebody that you're bringing them on at half time, take a player off for them at half time. Spread the minutes if you're going to make that promise. If not, you say to your team, I do not know, and I'm going to evaluate the game and the team's needs as well. So bear with me and I'll come and communicate with you when I'm ready. So kind of take the lead with it in one way. But it's a tricky pill, and I feel for managers that are in this situation, likewise, that go through periods where they're, a player's on the bench for a couple of weeks and you can see it in their eyes, they're frustrated, and you want to people please, and it can be difficult. So you just have to keep it consistent. My main thing is just to say, look, we'll see how the game goes and we'll put you on at the time when we can get the maximum out of you and the team as well. But apart from that, just don't say anything. And lastly, causing issues with the opposing team or only have your own team look at you less. This is a hot topic because I'll be open with our Sunday League for the 2022-23 season that we had to go through and play some teams that just quite frankly cheated. There's no two ways about it, and there was a lot of frustration on our team where we are too honest with running the line, where it's difficult. This is a really difficult one because this is where the big bulk of frustrations happen in games, where you can get really frustrated that another team is pulling the wool over the referee's eyes, or the referee hasn't showed up on a Sunday morning and their manager's refereed the game. You haven't even agreed to it, but it's happening, and all of a sudden you're in a mode where he's given them a penalty for nothing, or he's cheated, or their player's kicked out, or one of your own, he hasn't even given a free kick. There's loads of different experiences that we had this year where we were dealing with teams that were abusing referees consistently. We had players walk off of games because of the way that players from the opposing teams were speaking with players. Last season, we had a player punch one of our players, George, and he had a giant gaping wound in his mouth. He had to go to hospital. He got stitches on the inside and outside of his mouth. And in that instant, let's revert back to you as a manager. What do you do? What is your reaction? How are you going to best propose the situation to your team where you can come out of this looking sane, alive, and not coming across like a crazed lunatic? In some instances, it's easy to get hot and embroiled in the situation, and from my experience, I'm quick to the heat. My brother, who helps run certain assets, goes from 0 to 100. I feel like I take a little bit longer to power up, but depending on the people in your football club or the opposing team, you're going to have different personalities. So you just need to make sure that if you are outing the other team consistently, if you're screaming at their linesmen that they're making wrong decisions, or the referee, you're only going to end up, if this is a consistent thing throughout the game 10-12 times, let's say they are consistently cheating as a linesman, the best thing that you can do as a manager is to ask once or twice for the linesman to be changed and see what their opinion is, and just try to be fair and try not to lose your plot, because your other players in the team will eventually pick up on this and they will feed off your frustration. So it's a difficult one. It's a really, really hard one because you're in the heat of the moment with the players and you need to be able to keep a check on it. So at the end of the day, you need to communicate to your team. So you kind of have to be a strategist when this happens about how to best communicate to recover. Let's say you've had a goal ruled out that was onside and they were cheating at the last minute. You need to regroup your team at some point. So you have to be the one, if your captains aren't, to collect everybody and get their heads set. And if it doesn't happen during the game and you lose as a result, you need to go away and you're the person that has to pick everybody up with the team. Everybody is clearly accountable as well. And there's usually reasons you're in that position to begin with, and you have to lift everybody up. And there's no two ways around it. But to do that, you just have to make sure, as hard as it can be, that you keep yourself to a moral standard and try not to let it slip. Sometimes you do, and then you reflect and you learn and you grow. I know I've droned on and on today, and I promise you we are near the end of this day one Grassroots Manager seminar pretty much, and we're going to go into the last major point, which is around the hidden details of you becoming a Grassroots Manager in your own right. So we're just going to go through point by point as usual. So the first point states that organising training sessions and games, for example, if you organise over WhatsApp groups, can take time on a weekly basis. You have to be consistently organised when organising football events. So one of the big hidden things that they do not tell you when you start, it's like when you start a new job and it's like, oh, what aren't they telling me? These are the not telling me parts. And the time that you spend organising events and speaking with players and going through feedback and organising sessions, and if you have any other content such as videos, this is the real time killer involved. So I am at the far end of it, and I've already mentioned that we have a YouTube channel, we have a functioning website, we do match reports, photography, we do all of the social media stuff, I do all of the team's graphic design. So I'm in at the deep end, and I know full well how long it takes to do it at a good level for a grassroots team. And you know, it can take its toll. If you want to run a social media, you've got to spend a couple minutes updating stuff, and you know, you've got to monitor it. If you're looking to get analytics or grow followers, you need to grow it. If you're going to reach out to sponsors, that takes time. If you're reaching out to players and they have feedback and genuinely talking about the team, takes time. Everything here is a little hidden killer, which is why before, as I go back to the beginning, you need to understand how much time you have, and that will kind of feed on your ambition for your team. But let's say you can spend 10 hours a week on it, right? So you've got the 2 to 4 hours out and about playing the football at trainings. You then have 6 hours, and I probably think this is representative, half the time doing the team, half the time at the actual training sessions, and then half of the time is spent off the field organising. If you have to pay any yellow card fees, if you have to pay for your training sessions, if you have to do all of this organisation stuff, it can take a couple of hours a week. It can take, you know, it's just not too long. It's usually a few clicks of a button on a website, but you have to be consistent, and you have to make sure you've got a block of time every single week available to you so that you can be best suited to organising your team. I'm again at the far end. I have a set schedule that I need to do. So after a game on a Sunday, when we were at our maximum playing Saturday and Sunday, we would make sure that the first things that we would do were update the website with all of the photography, the match reports, and also we would be doing all of the FA stuff as well, such as submitting your team online to the full-time FA website, which takes about 10-15 minutes depending on how quick you are at using the internet and how many goals your team scored, how many stats you have to input. So that can take its time. And then, you know, I do photography, editing on Sunday evening and on Mondays, match reports to go alongside that, so I'll just work as a block on them. And then I do the YouTube stuff if I've got time in between, say, work or organising training sessions for the rest of the week. On Monday, though, I always will put out my availability for players to play on the week, so it gives them the time for you to be able to plan your sessions for the training on Wednesday and the game on a Sunday. So this is the big one, because you need to really have a careful think about how much time you want to spend on you and your club and what your capabilities are, and if you have people that can support you. My big advocate is to get people in that can help you, get people invested in the team to pick up small little bits that you can't, such as using the full-time FA website or anything, just to spread the love for the team so that you're not given the full burden of responsibility. So next point, there are club associated admins that need to be completed. So I'll just go through a few basics. So you have to fill out the team sheets, as I mentioned earlier on. You also have to make sure that you collect one from the opposition team as well. After the game, every club has to go onto full-time FA website. They then have to basically do a virtual log of that. So they have to put in the teams, their teams and the goal scorers, and if you want, who scored, what time, any yellow cards, and then you go from there. On addition to that, you also have to attend league meetings as well. So we are parts of the Berks and Bucks FA. It covers Buckinghamshire, some parts of Oxfordshire, places like Milton Keynes, Reading, Slough. So in the previous years and next season, we're going to be playing in the East Berks League, which is the EBFL, and the Reading Sunday League. So we're part of two different leagues, and that is dealt with two different lots of admins. So you have to attend meetings, usually once a quarter or once every half a year, so that you're put into the constitution for management and club updates. It's typically twice a year you have to go out, and then you will receive regular updates from the league secretary, aka the admin of the league rather than the team, who then, if they need anything from you, then you have to oblige. There may be some forms that you have to fill out before the season starts, such as, this is my club's name, this is where we're playing, this is the kit colour we're playing in. So you just have to be aware about dealing with all of that preamble as well. And yeah, all of that is club admin, like all this club admin that you have to do. And then if I'm going to go outside of FA regulations, the biggest part is to organise your team's equipment, footballs, kit, medical kit, and all of the different officers that your football teams are obliged to have, such as a welfare officer, which deals with players that, which is somebody that oversees the welfare of players, quite literally. So if they have issues, they come and speak to you. Then you have to have a treasurer who deals with finances, a chairperson who is like the symbolic lead role of the club, and a secretary that deals with all of the administration, such as what I've been talking about today. So moving on, you will have frustrating days at the office, but must try to remain calm. Yeah, again, I don't really think I need to go into too much more about this. I covered it a lot. I will just keep continually stressing though that you are always under a development cycle and a development curve. I don't think that the Premier League here does itself justice, because they're the guys that need to set the standard from the very top. I am a big fan of Liverpool. I support Newcastle, but I'm a big fan of how Liverpool play. I'm a big fan of how Man City play. You know, they're really good technical teams that you can enjoy watching. Liverpool are a little bit more unpredictable, so they can have really fiery games. Man City can sometimes be so good that it's sterile to watch. And Arsenal as well play some really good young football under Mikel Arteta at the time. And, you know, these are all managers that have a lot they've got a lot of influence over football. When you see Jurgen Klopp screaming at a fourth official, Pep Guardiola screaming at a fourth official or the referee, coming out afterwards making just weird accusations about their performances, they may be correct, and Mikel Arteta does the same as well. I know Jason Tindall at Newcastle, he's the guy that stood up all the time. He's in the fourth official's ear all the time. These are the guys that, you know, I'm picking out just this, but the FA, if they're serious about combating it across all levels, need to start with the generational capping of it at the top. And, you know, these frustrations that managers have, which are that the referees' decisions aren't correct, that they're frustrated by other players, that they're really invested in the moment. If they lose the plot, and a young kid is watching that loves Liverpool, he adores watching Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp, if he may subconsciously think that that's the correct behaviour to have when he eventually becomes a manager, if that's what he will do. But what it does is that it plants in everyone's heads from a young age that you can basically just scream at a fourth official and nothing happens. And that's not how it works at Grassroots. At Grassroots, referees are very, very clear about this. They hate the fact that there's a lack of support for referees, and they are trying to constantly be protected from opposing managers, opposing clubs, because they don't feel protected by the FA. So if you're feeling frustrated, just realise that other people are frustrated, and again, it's all about keeping it in check. But the FA could do a lot more at the very tippy top to obviously do this. And as a manager, you need to be appreciative of the fact that you're not moving into a perfect environment. Football in England with the grassroots level, largely, it's not that bad compared to when you go abroad. I've been to grassroots games out there. It's a whole nother beast. It's a really different environment. It's a lot more aggressive. There doesn't seem to be as much standards of respect that we have. So we're ahead of the curve in some regards, but there's always more that you can do. So just always keep that in check. You're going to have bad days, but you just have to get over it. You learn from it, and that's what this whole thing's been about from being a day one manager. So next up, you'll be challenged by passionate players and club captains who want to help. Without the help of my football team and the players around me that really care, I wouldn't be half the person that I am today. And I know full well that I can be better, and that my players can be better, and the volunteers that I'm mentioning can be better. But without their input and without their influence and without everything that they do to support me and the club, you're not half the person. You need to appreciate them. You need to be able to lean on them, and also expect to be challenged by them. What you say will not always go. You're not I know it sounds weird, but managers are not the primary voice. Owners are not the primary voice. You have other people that have primary voices. You are not the only main character in this story, and other people have other ways that you can do things in a positive, constructive way that you haven't thought of. So lean on that experience and lean on the players and the personnel that I've mentioned that you can get better with. You grow. There's no growing in a team sport. There's no growing on your own. You grow as a collective, and then you can pick up experiences that you can pass along to other people in the future. But you grow by learning and challenging each other together. And then we're going to talk about conflict. So you'll come into conflict with people inside of the football bubble, leagues, referees, other players, opposing teams, and sometimes you just will not agree with people. 99.9% of people that I've met in football, I've got no issues with. Some of them are my very good friends now, but there's always that needle in the haystack where, for whatever reason, your two personality types just do not meld well together. There is just friction, hostility. You may be dealing with, like, when I was a lot younger managing, when I started when I was 28, the first managers that I was dealing with were they were either Albanian, Polish, or they were 90 years old, and either I couldn't communicate with them, like literally, and there was a disconnect, or you had an old timer that they've learned all that they can learn, but then their experiences, they just do not want to listen to you, and they think that as a 28-year-old you need to be put in line because they know more than you. And that's just, it's part and parcel of what you're going to have to learn and come with. And referees have a different view. They see football in a different way, and a right way for them to manage, and you don't understand their relationships, but they're not the people that I'm on about. I'm on about hardcore managers that you come up with that just cause you nothing but grief. They're looking to cheat. They could be a team that's just out there just to make you miserable. And a lot of football teams sometimes don't have respect, and you just have to get used to it. You just have to learn how to battle these demons physically on the pitch and mentally. So it's not an easy challenge, and if I had a direct answer on how to physically deal with it, then I would supply an answer. But you don't have answers. What you have are opportunities to learn how you would deal with somebody in a way the next time you meet them. And sometimes, as everything, time allows things to heal, but largely you're gonna have to deal with people that you just do not like, and it's a part and parcel of football. I had 2 years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, when we just come out of COVID, some team tried to basically take our football team and merge it with their own, and I didn't want that. I wanted to stay as Hype Train. I wanted my project and my team, and I was dealing with very persistent yet uncomfortable people that just wouldn't take no for an answer, and eventually I just had to basically tell them to bugger off in no uncertain ways. And I couldn't pussyfoot around the conversation. I just had to say it flat out. And with the trial coaches that I've had, I had to be brutal with their feedback because they weren't listening. I was telling them that players were paying for their sessions and that we weren't getting much done and it wasn't very constructive, and they weren't taking it on board. And players were telling me, I don't want to pay for these sessions, I don't want to come along anymore, we're not touching the ball, we're not kicking a lot, we're there for their ego. And I was telling the managers this, none of them wanted to listen. They thought that what they were doing was for the greater good, and I was telling the management at the time that their greater good was going to lose me a core chunk of my players. And this is the same with every grassroots team, because there's always another team that you can go to. I was trying to protect the players that I had, and sometimes these management were like, oh, it'll be okay, we'll figure it out, we don't need to change, just stay the course. And that can be very frustrating, and you just need to learn how that. And sometimes the feedback that I had to give to these managers was all very universal. You're just driving players away, and you need to be in football to involve players, not push them the other way. Which is kind of why I wanted to do this podcast, so that if a new manager is watching this, they don't trip over and make the same hurdles. It's always better to start as a humble person and learn and grow, instead of coming into it as a newbie with set ideas and principles that may be not what grassroots football needs. That's pretty much kind of that. And then you're going to always be recruiting for players. And so the date today, oh God, I've been stuck in my room for a few days. It's the 20th of June today. I am roughly 3 weeks away from holding some trial sessions for our football team. And to organise a trial session, you need to spend a lot of time advertising for players, maybe spending money to put some local sponsorship posts up, maybe putting your poster on some local bulletin boards, attracting players. There's a lot that you can do in the local community or online to try to recruit for players, networking with friends or whoever it may be. But you will spend a lot of time recruiting players, and it's a consistent year-round thing for me. I never stop recruiting for players. Some managers tell me that they don't recruit at certain times of the year, and I call them bonkers sometimes, because you have to. I've never been in an environment in grassroots football where you can have enough. You always need more players around. You're always going to have weeks where you're short, so you need to bring in new people and always challenge your environment. Otherwise, you're always just going to stay in the same place, and a player that could be with you for 10 years could slip by because you close the door. So it's a hidden detail, and maybe it's that people have accepted that they don't have enough time to be able to communicate over a long period of time about recruitment. But yeah, we will be so we've got a trial session coming up, and it's meant that I've had to send a lot of messages, organise dates with venues, and it can be a time killer as well. But it's a necessity if you're looking to grow and expand or replace players that have unfortunately left you over the summer, be it that they've got kids, they've retired, they've been injured. So there's a multitude of reasons why you need to be constantly looking for players, and as a manager you can be part of that process to make it happen. Largely, managers are called upon for their experience on how to talk and recruit for players, and likewise, as a club secretary, players will want to know who's going to be managing them on a day-to-day. If it's not going to be me, I'll have to let them know, and then their immediately question will be, oh, is he any good? What's it going to be like? So, you have to realise that the club above you, if you're just managing, will have these conversations about you as a manager. So the best that you can do is just to keep it nice and simple, so that your chairperson or your secretary can go to other players and say, God, he runs some good training sessions, he does a great job at communicating, he does all the basics right, you'll enjoy it here. So that's kind of what you need to keep as a standard that I would probably say. And lastly, developing your skills is a long-term commitment. You are always learning to develop your skills and how you communicate, so that you're never the finished article in football, and you can always improve. There's no other way around it. You will never, I've already mentioned it, it's an unfinished book. You just keep adding chapters to your story. And yeah, it's just something that you have to get used to. Teething problems in football are so real. I came from in Reading. I used to play for Woodley United, and they are a big team that's got loads of different age groups. The adult teams are at the end of that process, and I was playing for them just as I was an adult. I played for Purley Jubilee, which was one of my local teams close to my secondary school, and I played that with some of my friends from school, which was great. But the team at Woodley, they were a big institution, a lot of clubs in the area, and yeah, they I just had hit my cap with my development with them. I wanted something different, I wanted something new, and when I started my football team, I had a set idea about how things were going to be as a manager, as a player, and I had one particular mindset. I was motivated and was learning to do things that I thought that they were doing wrong. So I was picking up cues and that I wanted to instill in my own players, and ultimately the group of players that I thought I needed and wanted, compared to the players that I ultimately had and have been gifted to have in that presence and in that void, it's just two worlds apart. So what you think you're going to have and what you end up with is two completely different streets. So you just have to always take on board that you're always going to be at a development cycle. Each year you're going to have a different development cycle of different players coming in and out. You're constantly going to be growing and learning and developing, unfortunately getting older to the cause as well. So you're going to naturally learn. So I would never ever advocate if you're in management to ever close the door on your development. Always just keep going. Never be that grumpy old man that's just learnt it all and he's just happy to rest on his laurels. There's always more that you can do in football to learn day to day. And finally, I know I've probably bored most of the audience on YouTube away from this video, and if so, we're going to round it up just with some basically what I've learned so far. So over time, you become more confident at speaking with players and organising events. Your team and groups of players is ever evolving, so naturally the dynamics and demands of your group consistently change. You have to speak honestly with your team. Sending mixed messages only hurts your club. You must be ready to accept that people close to the club can sometimes leave and new relationships in the club form. And yeah, like before I go on to that, which deals with the FA coaching afterwards, that is a big point as well. I started the football team with Sam and another couple of close football friends at the time, and they're no longer with the club. And you have to learn to appreciate that players will move on, good people that you've known for years. And it's just an unfortunate part of life, but people do grow on and they move on in life. They can move, family, all of these different life events that I've battered into your eardrums for a couple of hours today is pretty much, what it's like in football. And, as a 32-year-old, I've gone through 80, 90 different types of players, people that come as graduates and leave. Some of the best players that I've ever had come in were some university graduates that came in for one season. They were absolutely incredible people. They were better footballers, believe it or not, if that's even to believe. Some really nice northern lads that just galvanised my team for a year. But they were only there for 1 year, and it was a poison chalice because we won a cup with them. But they were so great. They won the cup, but they just couldn't stay around because, they were still going back to university, living their lives, young in their 20s, still figuring it out. So sometimes you have people that you have to, learn to live without. And in the case of having guys in my team called George, Matt, another George called Fragile, and Paul, they were incredible, but you just have to learn to accept the good moments for when they are there, because other people will ultimately come in to give you different types of memories and inclusion as well. And aside from that, I just wanted to go into the FA Level 1 coaching badge first of all, because I have literally, as of a day ago, I completed the first course. So I am a level 1 or a introduction to football qualified coach now, and I waited until 2023 to do the course. It wasn't available for some time during COVID because they moved everything online, but I kind of wish that I had done the course from day one, and I mainly wish that I had done that because the FA Level 1 course was even for me, who's been coaching for 4 years or running a football club, I learnt so much, and I've come away thinking, oh my God, there are so many basics at play I wish that I had done, because, I thought I was the finished article, and then I wasn't, and then you do these FA courses and you realise that you're just one of a great lake of managers that are learning their craft, people that know football just as much, that can communicate with different groups. So yeah, I kind of wish that I'd done the FA coaching badges. So just a bit of an overview if you don't know as a new manager what the courses are. So your level 1 is called Introduction to Coaching Football. Your level 2 is now the UEFA C license. Then the level 3 is the B, then you get the A, and the pro license is at the very top. The pro license is what all the professional managers have to have. It's what you need to manage in the Champions League, in the Premier League, and then you just basically work it down. So for a grassroots coach, the Introduction to Football is open to everyone, as is the UEFA C license. The major difference is that the FA Level 1 course is all to do around online webinars and online seminars, training courses online for you to get a good introduction on football, whereas UEFA C is a little bit more practical element. So you'll learn online as well as having to do assessments in person, usually with your county FA. Your UEFA B license is then a little bit more tailored and niche as you start to go up into the football pyramid, such as like lower non-league, and then UEFA A is pretty much your pro licenses onwards. But I would definitely stress to do the level 1 course for these exact benefits. So you do weekly webinars, so it takes place over 4 weeks. It's broken down into segmented parts where you can do a few weekly online training courses, similar to like what you have to do when you start a new job or you're working and you have to do like refresher courses on first aid, or anything to do with like slave trade movements, if you work in any type of these facilities, just that you understand business practices. It's very similar when you do the FA Level 1 course. You just go through online seminars and online learning with assessments and questionnaires at the end for you to pass the courses. So you have to do about 4 to 6 of them, which cover elements such as first aid, safeguarding, different types of football like pan disability, which I never really knew anything about. I was fascinated when I found out how blind football operated. For example, I didn't know anything about it, and now that course has opened my eyes to that world of football. Even though I'm not involved in it, it gives you a good course on how it's good, gives you a good refresher on, my god, like what types of football are there. There's football for everyone as well. So on top of that, you then go through weekly webinars. Mine have been on a Friday evening at 6 o'clock. So it's after hours when you've got time in the evening on a Friday afternoon, just for an hour, where they run through different drills and coaching. It's great because I learnt 3 or 4 new drills within a couple of hours of doing the online seminars that I'm going to approach with my team next season. As well as that, you get to access coaching online, which is all of the different, you get loads of resources, you get loads of different structures, plans, different types of forms for you to fill out that you can then have to aid and abet your sessions, which is so good. On top of that, one qualification that most football clubs are going to need in the near future is a welfare or a safeguarding course. From the 2024-25 season, having a welfare officer is going to be a mandatory part of your football club, and you can do all of this by doing your FA Level 1 course. So the first aid and your safeguarding courses are part of that, and they are if you want to run a football league one day, or you want to get involved or run kids coaching or anything like that, you're going to need to do your FA Level 1 mostly for your safeguarding and your first aid, as well as the way that you talk to players and learn from your assessments as well. So the first aid course is obviously imperative. There's not too many volunteers in grassroots football on Saturday and Sunday, so if you are, it's always good to cover your bases. Let's say we had an incident near the end of the season where we had a couple of players, our goalkeeper and an opposing winger, collided. They were both going for the ball. There was just an unfortunate collision, and my god, they both clattered into each other at 1,000 miles an hour. The opposing player actually had his tooth thrown out of his mouth. They collided so hard, and there was about a 10-minute period where the game had to stop, where the players were both down. One of them was concussed, our goalkeeper, and the other person was looking for his tooth on the ground whilst being stitched up. And we had a couple of first aiders, one from our team and one from the opposing team, who were very good at being able to come together. And without that, they might not have had the best knowledge of how to deal with an incident on the pitch. So as a volunteer, as a manager, I would stress to do it, because you're going to be more alert to whenever these issues happen. You're going to be closer to a medical kit on the side of the pitch as well. So it's a definite benefit for you to be able to get used to that as well. On top of that as well, you get overviews of everything, lots of resources. I'll just go back to the blind football one, because that's the big one, because this is all about opening and challenging your mind and experiences. As a football manager, I always assumed that football was just played in my confined space, and I'd never realised what blind football was. And it's on a regulated pitch where you've got safe boarding, so nobody can crash into each other and fall off the face of the earth or anything like that. So it's all nice and secure. They have to wear blindfolds so that there's no cheating involved in case somebody is partially blind. There's some type of a rattle in the football so that you can hear it. And when you take free kicks, what happens is that the referee has to go behind the goal and basically smash against the post so that the player can kind of get an instinct on where it happens as well. And also, when a player is about to collide with somebody, they have to make a certain noise. I forgot what the noise is off the top of my head, but it opened my eyes about the types of the football that goes on around the world. Recently, I've learned that church football requires you to do a prayer before any type of games played, whether or not they're Sikh, Christian, Buddhist, whoever. I'm not going to single out any religion, but whatever it is happens. And yeah, there's lots of different practices, and managers should be aware about this, because this, if you're going to manage one of these different types of teams, you need to be accessible to understanding what it's all about. And doing the FA1 course really gives you a good perspective of all types of pan disability, adult and youth football. And apart from that, it honestly does just coach you to be a better person and a better coach as well. And even 3 or 4 years into the course, I feel like I'm now better prepared to handle my players and have a lot more resource and confidence to be able to interact with all groups of players. And on top of that, you can then say to interested players that you have to approach the trial sessions that you have qualified coaches on board, which is never a bad thing. So I'd like to thank everybody for bearing with me in this conversation today over Grassroots Managers on day one. I've had to unpack a lot, and I've taken a lot of time to excruciatingly go into some details about managers and getting into football. It's always good to have an open eye when going into football management, and that's kind of why I wanted to do today. I've had a lot of experience dealing with trial managers, and what I would love to do is elevate grassroots football by getting people on day one involved. You're never going to be perfect. There's going to be a learning curve, and you're going to meet people that challenge your beliefs. It's only natural. And what I would just as a takeaway is that if you have anybody that would like to get into football management and they just do not know the first thing about running a football team at this level, at the basement level, I would recommend them to maybe watch this video. I've put in the below all of the different segments that we go into to break it down easier, because it's a long video. And it definitely can come in handy, because I'm of that ilk. I didn't come from a background of being in football all of my life. I've been a passionate football fan. Football is everything about my life, and hype training is kind of the way that I show the world my passion for it. And other managers will have exactly the same experiences. And for all the trial coaches that I have had and I've had experienced, it's always just good to basically put it out there what people can do better, so that when they run their own football clubs, they're a better version of themselves than the day before. And apart from that, I'll leave you to it, and I hope that you've really enjoyed today. We've got a lot more coming up on the podcast, a lot of interviews, a lot more how-to guides such as today to help get people involved in football at all levels. I hope it's been engaging. I know that I'm a little bit of a tiresome figure after a few hours, so I'd just like to say thank you for everybody for watching, and until next time, believe the hype.